Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. We're going to peel back the layers of something so incredibly familiar, something you probably interacted with just a few hours ago, and reveal a truly global historical epic. I mean, every single morning, the slow sound of grinding beans and the smell of a fresh brew fills kitchens all over the world. But the history sitting inside that mug? It's much heavier, much more complex, and honestly, way more fascinating than you might think. We are looking at the story of a wild African plant that literally went on to shape the modern world.
Now, look at this number for a second. Billions. Every single morning, billions of people wake up and reach for a small cup of coffee. We rely on it to start our days, to push through our afternoon slumps, and to connect with friends. Yet, despite how completely normal this routine is, billions of us take that sip without knowing the true origins of what we're actually drinking.
Because before we had these massive global coffee chains, fancy espresso machines, or instant coffee packets, the journey of this beverage was fiercely dramatic. This is a history forged by legends, religion, global trade, empires, colonialism, and slavery. Today, we're going to trace exactly how a wild plant native to Africa transformed entire global economies, sparked revolutions, and connected the planet long before the internet ever did. Let's kick things off with Chapter 1, Origins, Myths, and Legends. Okay, let's dive into this. Our timeline starts deep in the lush green highlands of Ethiopia, where the wild coffee plant naturally grows. The most famous story in coffee history takes place right here, and it involves a young 9th century goat herder named Kaldi. As the legend goes, Kaldi was watching his flock one day when he noticed something highly unusual. After eating bright red berries from a certain tree, his goats became wildly hyperactive, literally jumping around and refusing to sleep. Well, curiosity got the better of Kaldi, so he tried the berries himself and experienced that very same sudden burst of energy. According to the tale, he brought these magical berries to a local monastery. The monks initially rejected them, but when the berries were eventually roasted, an incredible aroma filled the air. They crushed the beans, mixed them with water, and boom, coffee was born.
But actually, here's where we need to make a really sharp distinction. As great of a story as Kaldi and his dancing goats is, there's zero documented evidence that it actually happened in the 9th century. If we want hard historical facts, we actually have to cross the Red Sea into Yemen. It's here, among 15th century Sufi communities, that we find the absolute earliest well-documented evidence of coffee being cultivated, prepared, and consumed as a beverage.
That takes us right into Chapter 2, the Islamic world's social drink.
So, moving into the 15th century, we see coffee evolve from a very specific practical tool into a massive cultural phenomenon. Initially, for those Sufi communities in Yemen, coffee wasn't about catching up with friends over a latte. It was a tool. The stimulating effects of the drink were utilized to help worshippers remain awake, alert, and intensely focused during long, nighttime religious devotions. It was a way to gather together and maintain mental clarity for their spiritual practices.
But a drink this powerful just couldn't be kept quiet for long. Coffee soon traveled outward through the Islamic world, reaching major cultural hubs like Mecca, Cairo, Damascus, and Istanbul. And this led to something truly revolutionary, the birth of the coffeehouse. Imagine walking into a 16th century coffeehouse. You wouldn't just find people drinking, you'd find a vibrant mix of merchants, travelers, scholars, storytellers, and political thinkers. These became incredibly dynamic social spaces for intense conversation, information sharing, and intellectual exchange. In fact, they were so effective at bringing people together to debate politics that authorities often grew highly suspicious of the gatherings happening inside them. Coffee was no longer just a beverage, it was a real game changer. It was a powerful social institution.
So here's a really crucial point. As this booming coffee culture expanded, all of the coffee leaving Yemen to supply these new coffeehouses had to pass through one specific port. The name of that prominent Arabian port? Mocha. Because it was the major epicenter of the early global coffee trade, the name of the port became permanently associated with the beans themselves. That is exactly why the word mocha is still printed on menus in nearly every coffee shop across the globe today.
Moving on to Chapter 3, Europe's Age of Ideas. By the 17th century, this immense curiosity over this strange, dark drink began to conquer cities like Venice, London, and Paris. At first, Europeans weren't quite sure what to make of it, but soon, coffeehouses sprang up across the continent. And this brilliantly illustrates how a drink originally used by Sufi worshippers in Yemen evolved to fuel Europe's Age of Enlightenment.
These European coffeehouses became the undisputed centers for the circulation of information, business networks, and public debate. They were fueling a rapidly changing intellectual world, providing a public space where writers, scientists, and merchants could meet, argue, and share groundbreaking ideas. Coffee was literally fueling the global conversation.
Okay, let's map this out and see how this plant actually traveled geographically. For a long time, Yemen controlled the commercial supply of coffee. But European colonial powers wanted the living plant itself, not just the roasted beans. So they aggressively exported the plant into their tropical colonies. After being cultivated in Yemen and popularized in Europe, the Dutch successfully established coffee cultivation in places like Java during the colonial era. From there, it crossed the ocean to the Caribbean, and eventually, in 1727, coffee arrived in Brazil.
Now, we need to shift gears for Chapter 4, The Dark Side of Coffee.
To truly understand this beverage, we absolutely must look at the deeply uncomfortable, dark historical truths behind its global boom. As worldwide demand for coffee absolutely skyrocketed, this one tiny seed began to transform entire landscapes and economies in Latin America, particularly in Brazil. By the 19th century, Brazil had built a massive coffee empire. The sheer wealth generated by coffee meant that railways were constructed, ports were massively expanded, and immense fortunes were created, helping to build major modern cities like Sao Paulo. However, there was a terrible human price paid for this boom. The enormous plantation economies that generated all of this wealth were inextricably linked to systems of forced labor. The historical record is crystal clear on this. Brazil's coffee economy was deeply connected to slavery.
Specifically, before 1850, the grueling labor required on these massive coffee plantations was heavily supplied through the transatlantic slave trade, which was later followed by internal slave trading. It's vital we recognize that the history of coffee isn't just a fun story about delicious drinks, lively coffeehouses, and intellectual innovation. It is equally a story of immense human cost, colonial power, staggering wealth, and severe exploitation. Enslaved people were forced to produce the very drink that was rapidly becoming the world's favorite beverage.
Let's bring this full circle with Chapter 5, The Global Cup Today.
Understanding that heavy past really helps us better understand the world we live in right now. Today, this complex history has resulted in thousands of ways we consume the drink globally, from Italian espresso to ice-cold brews. But if we want to see how deep this connection goes, we can look right back to where the story began. In modern Western culture, coffee is often this frantic, grab-and-go commodity just to get us to work on time. But in Ethiopia today, coffee remains deeply embedded in the culture through the traditional Ethiopian coffee ceremony. This is a highly social, profoundly connected experience where the coffee is carefully roasted, ground, and brewed while people gather together, honoring the plant in the very forests where its history started. Now, before we wrap up this explainer, I've got a direct question for you. Think about the beans sitting in your kitchen right now. Wait, is a coffee bean actually a bean?
Well, here is the incredible botanical truth. No, it's not. The thing we call a coffee bean is not a bean at all. It's actually a seed found inside the fruit of the coffee plant, which is commonly known as a coffee cherry. That means every single morning when billions of people wake up and brew a pot of coffee, they are actually drinking a beverage made from the roasted seeds of a fruit. It's just one final surprising layer to a plant we all thought we completely understood.
And that, everyone, is the true journey of this remarkable plant. So the next time you hold a warm cup of coffee, don't just think about the caffeine or the taste. Think about the monks and the merchants. Remember the sailors, the empires, and the enslaved workers who carried this seed across the globe under brutal conditions. Remember that behind that simple everyday cup lies a history as powerful, dark, and complex as the drink itself. I just have to ask, knowing all of this, will you ever view your morning coffee the same way again? Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer, and keep learning.